My name is Terrell Jermaine Starr, senior reporter with The Root, and I am here with Congressman Seth Moulton and the newest candidate for President of the United States. How you doing there?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Welcome to the race.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on.
So there are a ton of people running right now, and so just wanted to ask you, why did you throw your hat in?
You know, I think I have something a little bit different to offer this field. The most challenging thing that I've ever had to do in my life was get an incredibly diverse set of Americans united behind a common mission in Iraq. I had Marines in my platoon from all over the country, from Alabama, from Massachusetts, from Vermont, from California. We came together with remarkably different backgrounds, different religious beliefs, different political beliefs, but at the end of the day, we had to be united behind a common mission to do the best thing for America. And I think in many ways, that's what we need out of the next commander-in-chief. We have an unbelievably divided country, and we literally right now have the most divisive commander-in-chief in American history. We've got to bring America back together again, and I have a leadership background and experience to do that.
You know, here at The Root, we write for Black people, and okay, I guess you figured it out, right? But what are some of your plans for Black America if you win the presidency?
Well, first of all, I think Democrats for too long have thought of Black America as just one monolithic voting bloc. The truth of the matter is that Black Americans have helped our party immeasurably. I mean, Doug Jones got elected in Alabama on the backs of Black women. Stacey Abrams would have been elected in Georgia if not for Republican election fraud. But for too long, we haven't actually done anything to really earn those votes in the Democratic Party. We've just sort of taken them for granted. And I've seen this at home, I've seen it across the country. So we need to talk about really seriously fixing some of the challenges that we have in this country around racial equality. We've got to have serious criminal justice reform. I've been an advocate for legalizing marijuana. It's something that I mean, it's just despicable when you read these stories about like this guy in Louisiana who was thrown in prison for life for selling $20 worth of weed. We've got to get rid of those laws. We've got to expunge those convictions. That's just the start, but criminal justice reform is a huge part of this. We've got to make educational opportunity truly equal. I've talked for a long time, I mean, I haven't been in politics that long, I've been 5 years, but for 5 years I've been talking about how even just back home in Massachusetts, educational opportunity is not equal. From one zip code to the next, it's different. But I was saying this to a group of women at an event in Salem, Massachusetts recently. And a young woman of color, a high schooler, stood up and she said, look, I agree with you, but we gotta talk about something else. Even within my zip code, educational opportunity is not equal. Because white kids are getting a better education than Black kids. Because Black kids don't have any mentors when they look up to teachers in the schools. And you know what, that really hit me because she's right. She's right. So we've got a lot of work to do on actually living up to that constitutional value that everybody has equal opportunity in America. That's just a start, but the point is that we've got a lot of work to do, and I think Democrats ought to earn the votes of Black America, not just count on them.
You tweeted that Black History Month should be every month. What do you mean by that?
I mean, Black history is American history. Like, it's just part of who we are. It's part of our DNA. It's part of our culture. It's part of what makes us a great country. And so we should be talking about these issues all the time. We should be talking about the fact that Black America is America, and yet there are two different Americas right now. And they're not equal, and they don't have equal opportunities. And frankly, they never had. And that's wrong. And you know what? White people like myself, we need to do more to fix this problem. We need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, as long as this inequality exists, and we need to do more to stop it.
That is a very self-reflective thing to say, look yourselves in the mirror. Do you talk to other white people about that?
I do. You know, I try to say this and, you know, as I'm going around talks and speeches and whatnot. But more than just talking, I really just try to listen. And one of the things I tell, you know, fellow white Americans is spend some time listening. You know, spend some time just going to Black communities and sitting down and listening. There's this amazing breakfast group in Massachusetts, in inner city Boston, and I've been invited there, and you sit down and listen to, it's actually Black men who are trying to be leaders and role models in their community, and they're doing extraordinary work. They're doing inspiring work. I think a lot of people in white America, they always say, oh, you know, black America wants handouts. That's not what I'm hearing. They want opportunities. They want the same opportunities that a white kid like myself had growing up in a, you know, middle-class town in Massachusetts. That shouldn't be too much to ask for every American citizen, no matter what the color of your skin.
You tweeted about Trayvon Martin and saying that he should be alive today. Just wanted to ask you, how did his killing affect you personally?
Part of the work that we did in Iraq was essentially policing work. You know, I mean, after the invasion, I was in the first company of Marines into Baghdad and all that. But then we were just trying to figure out a way to make the community safe. And when I look at police officers in America, half the time they're literally wearing more body armor and have more guns than we had walking through the streets of Iraq. And what does that say about police in America today? So we got a lot of work to do on just understanding what community policing really means. Understanding that the whole broken windows theory of policing that was, I think, started here in New York City, you know, hasn't been successful. It's thrown a whole bunch of innocent people in prison. And at the end of the day, this is lives on the line. Because it's people like Trayvon Martin who are not alive today because we don't have adequately trained police. Because we don't make mandatory that every police officer have a body cam. We don't make it mandatory that we have de-escalation training in every police department. And we're not learning the fundamentals of community policing that even as a United States Marine, we had to learn in a place like Iraq.
Just wanted some clarification. Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, who was not a police officer.
He was using the whole
stand your ground.
The stand your ground laws. But you know, it's this whole culture, right? It's this whole culture that has led to these police killings. It's led to people thinking that they're going to take criminal justice into their own hands. So, you know, it's this culture of like, you know, policing in America, whether it's individuals taking on these, you know, this role they feel a right to themselves, or it's the example set by police in our community that's just wrong. Like, that should not be happening in our communities. It shouldn't be happening anywhere in America. And I don't know, I guess I just try to bring the perspective that I had when I was in Iraq to what it means to have safe communities. And you know, this kind of stuff is it's despicable. It's wrong.
Many activists don't believe that police reform will stop police officers from abusing their power, with many calling for the abolishment of policing as we know it for another model. As president, how would you address police abuse?
Well, we've got to get to the heart of why it's happening. And that's why I'm talking about things like making sure we have mandatory de-escalation training. It's making sure that we have a real serious community policing model so that people understand what it means to really be out there to make your community safe. You know, imagine if you, imagine if you were an 18-year-old and you had too much to drink and you said, you know what, I don't want to drive home, so I'm going to go to the police to get a ride. Can you imagine that happening in America today? I mean, I can't, and I'm a white person. Even as a white person, I can't imagine going up as an 18-year-old and asking a police officer, hey, I've been drinking too much, you know, can you give me a ride home? Because I'd expect him to, you know, to cite me for alcohol, you know, underage drinking or whatever else. It really struck me that when I was going to school, a friend of mine from overseas, from the UK, said that's what we do back there. That's the relationship that we have with the police. We actually think that they're really there to keep us safe. I don't think many Americans, white or black, believe that the police are actually, you know, someone you can go to because they're going to make us like feel more comfortable or safe. And I have a daughter. You know, she's only 6 months old, but she's growing up. I know that just because she's white, I don't have to train her what to do at a traffic stop so that she won't get shot. But I know a lot of black Americans who feel they have to train their kids just to not get shot at a traffic stop. And that's a real sad reality of America today. And as long as that persists, then we don't really have law enforcement making our communities safe. We have a law enforcement that's creating this adversarial culture, which is exactly the kind of adversarial culture that you saw with Trayvon Martin community, with this guy who felt like he was acting like a police officer. It's the exact same adversarial culture that leads to especially young black men getting shot by police across the country while they're totally unarmed. It's this culture of fear and resentment and abuse of authority, rather than a culture of what do we need to do to work together to make our community safe. Like, that should be the goal of police, right?
Should be. As a veteran, do you support NFL players kneeling for the national anthem?
I do, because fundamentally they're standing up for the same rights that I fought for in Iraq. And I know that's the heart of the issue. I understand that this is divisive. I understand that there are some Americans who think that folks are disrespecting the flag. But if you really listen to what these players are talking about, they're talking about upholding American values. They're talking about patriotism. This is what patriotism is about. It's about fighting for the values that make us American. And whether you're doing that overseas, whether you're doing it on a football field, whether you're doing it at protests across this country, you're making America stronger. We need to encourage that because I think it's what has made our country the best on earth.
Do you feel Democratic leadership, namely Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, is doing enough to protect new freshman congresswomen like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib from racist attacks?
Well, we need to do more because the attacks are unbelievably racist, and the racism, the outright racism that they have faced, just because of who they are, their religion, what they look like, what they wear. I mean, it's absolutely despicable. So, I mean, I think that our Democratic leadership is trying to stand up for them, but like, as long as these attacks continue, it's wrong and it's got to stop.
Do you regret challenging Speaker Nancy Pelosi's leadership role?
No, I don't. What we were challenging is the fact that we have 3 leaders in charge for 18 years who haven't moved, haven't allowed this new generation of leaders to come up. And frankly, being willing to challenge the establishment is something that I think we need in our party, and it's something that we need in our nominee to take on Donald Trump. As I've traveled around this country and met with voters across the land, I haven't found a single one who's come up to me and said, Seth, you know, I really wish you didn't challenge the Washington establishment as much as you do. And people know that Washington is broken, that we have to be willing to challenge the establishment, and that if we want this new generation of leaders, I mean, we just elected the most historically diverse class of House freshmen in American history, and if we want them to actually get a chance to lead, then we have to have some change at the top. And so what we achieved, the compromise that we came to, which gave her the votes to get elected speaker, but also set term limits to say that there will be an expiration date here. There's a chance for other young people to rise up. This is going to be good for the party. It's good for the country. Now Speaker Pelosi is doing a great job of just taking on Trump, and she's doing a fantastic job of that. But I want to make sure people look to our party and say, there's the future. There are the leaders who are going to take us forward, who are going to take on the new challenges of the day. And that's what we have as a result of this debate. We also got the climate change subcommittee, the voting rights subcommittee. None of that would have happened without this challenge.
So it's nearly 20 people running for the nomination. Do you think that this high number of people reveals an ununified Democratic Party?
No, not at all. I think it reveals the strength of our party because you have so many talented people running and offering their different perspectives on this race. I think that shows that we're a strong party, that we represent a diverse cross-section of America with a lot of different views and priorities. But what I'm trying to add to this race is a little bit different because I think that we're not taking on some core issues that we often just cede to the Republicans. Core issues like patriotism, like what patriotism really means. Core issues like security issues. We've got to own those as Democrats. We can't just say, oh yeah, the Republican Party, they deal with security. They're the party of patriotism. They're the party that salutes the flag. We've got to own those issues ourselves. I believe that we are more patriotic as Democrats because we believe in our real values and we stand up for them. We don't just salute the flag, we fight for what it stands for every single day at home and abroad. I'm a patriot. I don't believe that this country is perfect, but at its best, I think America is a country that always strives to be better. I mean, we haven't solved race in our country. We haven't solved healthcare in our country. We haven't solved fair tax code. We haven't solved criminal justice reform. But at our best, we're a country that says, we haven't figured these out, but we might, and we're going to keep trying.
There are a lot of candidates that are supporting reparations.
Yes.
Do you support reparations, or what will your plan look like?
So the core definition of reparations is repair. It's repairing the injustices that come from our slaveholding past and really have never been fixed. And I fully support that. I support Jim Clyburn down in South Carolina, his plan to make sure that we are investing in communities that have had historic levels of poverty. I support exactly the kind of education reform that we were talking about to make sure that every single American, black, white, no matter where you live in this country, you have an equal opportunity to a good education. I want to make sure that we have a lot of people have talked about like setting up a commission, and there's a HR, it's a bill in the House called HR 40 that would establish this commission to decide exactly what we need to do to really take on the challenge of looking at this issue seriously. And not just making it some litmus test political campaign issue, but saying, what are we actually going to do about that? What are we actually going to be able to do about this to have a more equal America?
There are a lot of progressive candidates out there that are proposing things like free health care and a basic monthly income. So how do you plan on distinguishing yourself from other progressive candidates?
Well, actually, I think I'm the only person in this race who gets single-payer health care, because when I got elected, I made a commitment to continue getting my own health care at the VA, just like all the Marines that I served with. I said, look, until we fix the VA and make sure that veterans get the best health care in the world, I'm going to keep going there myself. And I'll tell you, it's not perfect. It's got some real problems. So I think health care is a right. I think everybody in America deserves access to affordable, strong health care. But I'm not going to force you off your private plan if you like it. So in other words, I think that Medicare, or better, a more modern version of Medicare, since the plan was designed in 1963, I mean, I'm not sure that's really the best we can do. I think that should be available to everybody. But if you have private health care that you like, I'm not going to force you off of it. So my point is that I'm a Democrat, but I'm not a socialist. I'm someone who believes in the power of the free market. I believe that you can put opportunity to work. And that's the kind of philosophy that I think we need to take to a lot of challenges in this country, including healthcare.
So there are a lot of candidates who have their plans for how to beat Trump. What's yours?
I'm going to take him on the issues where I think he's weakest. And that's why I'm talking about issues like what it means to be patriotic in this country, what it means to tackle issues of security, including national security issues. My division motto in the Marine Corps was no better friend, no worse enemy. Donald Trump is doing the exact opposite. He's cozying up to our enemies, like North Korea, like Russia, and he's abandoning our friends and allies across the globe. We got to take him on these issues. We got to show the American people what moral leadership means, like at home, but also abroad, because that's America at its best. So what's different for me is I'm going to talk about some of these issues that too often we just let the Republicans talk about. We got to talk about these core value issues for America.
What do you think President Trump has gotten wrong the most during his presidency so far?
It's such a long list, it's a little bit hard to prioritize, but I think that the most fundamental thing, I mean, he's immoral. He's immoral, and I can go through all the different ways. I think he's a racist. I mean, I think that he is he's completely self-serving. He doesn't follow the Constitution. I mean, he's immoral in all these ways. But the most fundamental thing is you can't trust him. You can't trust anything that he says. And if there's one thing that we should know about the president, about the commander-in-chief, is that, look, we might not agree with him on everything, but we ought to be able to at least trust what that commander-in-chief says. And you literally can't trust this guy. That's one of the lessons that I learned when I went to Marine training. When I showed up at Marine training, you very quickly learn that you can fail a test and they'll probably let you retake it. You can drop out of a run and they'll let you run the next day. But if you lie about anything, you're gone that afternoon. That's how important trust is in a place where where we entrust you as the American people with life or death decisions about our country. And we can't trust this commander-in-chief.
You support statehood for Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. How do you plan on actually enacting that if you become president?
Well, I think that we need an advocate for this in the Oval Office. And so look, these things are hard to do. And I also support electoral college reform, for example. That requires most likely a constitutional convention. That's hard to get done. But we've never really had an advocate for it in the Oval Office. And that's the difference. I'm going to be an advocate up there. I recognize that it's not something you can just change by executive order. It's not like I can show up on day one and say, okay, Puerto Rico is now a state. But having an advocate in the highest office of the land to actually make these kinds of changes, to fundamentally reform our government so that we get back to having a government where we trust our leaders, where every vote actually counts. that would be a big difference. And just think about the Electoral College. Like, a lot of Americans know that their vote for president doesn't really matter. Like, there are only a few states that presidential candidates really go to campaign in, because look, like we're in New York right now, and everyone knows that New York's Electoral College votes are just going to go for the Democrat. So a lot of people are like, why would I even bother voting? And that's fundamentally wrong. The most fundamental value of a democracy is that every person's vote counts, and every person's vote counts equally. That's not the case right now in America.
Powerful Puerto Rico is a coalition of organizations and leaders of the Puerto Rican diaspora. They've called for 2020 candidates to support a Marshall Plan for Puerto Rico. Would you support that?
I was down in Puerto Rico, I guess last year, to look at the hurricane damage. And it was so obvious that a Marshall Plan is exactly the kind of investment that we need. A Marshall Plan just means that we are going to make a serious investment in a part of the world, just like we did in Europe under the actual Marshall Plan, because it will have a good return on that investment. It will make that part of the world stronger. It'll make it more competitive. And Puerto Rico is a part of America. If we can make that kind of investment in Europe, we certainly should be able to make it for American citizens in Puerto Rico.
So the Virgin Islands have been virtually forgotten in the conversation, especially after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. So what's your plan for the Virgin Islands?
Well, the same kind of investment is needed there as well. And Americans should know that when we invest in places like Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, we're going to get a good return on that investment. We're going to make them stronger, more resilient for the future. And I'm good friends with Stacey Plaskett, actually, in the Congress, and she's the representative for the Virgin Islands. And to hear from her the heartbreak that her constituents have gone through as they try to recover from these hurricanes, and the complete just absence of Washington, absence of this administration from doing anything to help, it's pretty messed up. We've got to fix that.
You wrote a Medium story about the inhumane way in which the U.S. has dealt with immigration, and so I wanted to ask you, what would be your plan for immigration reform?
So I spent some time on the border. I went down there with a lot of the candidates I was supporting to help flip the House in this last election. And unlike most congressional delegations, we didn't go down and just spend 5 hours in a press conference. We spent 2 days there on both sides of the border. We met with Customs and Border officials. We met with asylum seekers. We met with illegal immigrants. We met with people on the American side, people on the Mexican side. We even met with a house full of deported veterans. Think about that, deported veterans. That's a term that shouldn't even exist. I talked to a guy who served in the Navy for 10 years. He got a DUI. He admits, he shouldn't have gotten a DUI, but he did his time, and then when he got out of prison, he was deported. And the only mistake that he made is he just didn't bother to fill out his citizenship paperwork when he was in the Navy. I mean, he just didn't get around to it, right? His kids are American citizens, his parents are American citizens, and yet he's now living in Mexico, a country he hasn't seen since he was 16 years old. It's so messed up. And the point is that no one down there on any side of this issue says, oh, we just have to enforce existing laws. Like the president says, enforce existing laws. No, the laws are all broken. The system is fundamentally broken. We need a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. We need to make sure that people who are here, who are part of our communities, who are part of our economy, can actually get their paperwork straightened out and pay taxes like the rest of us. We need to make sure that we have a truly humane system to accept asylum seekers at the border. We also need to have strong borders. I believe, I'm a Democrat who's willing to say that as a country, you have to have borders that are effective. Now, one of the things that means down in the South is you got all these refugees from Central America coming up. We need to have some serious foreign aid to Central America to address these problems in countries like Honduras and Guatemala so that folks don't feel like they have to flee north for their lives. Of course, Trump is literally doing the exact opposite. He's pulling aid out of those countries. So this is a complicated issue, but there are things we know we can do to help, and it requires Democrats and Republicans to get together and actually do reform.
Tell us about your plan to make healthcare affordable for everybody.
So as a recipient of single-payer healthcare myself at the VA, I think that we need to make sure that everybody has access to a system like that, but it's not, we're not going to force you off of your private healthcare plan if you don't like it. So what does that mean? What it means is that if you have a public option, which is exactly what Obama pushed for under Obamacare. If you remember, at the last minute, the Congress cut out the public option. But essentially, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about strengthening Obamacare by giving folks a public option. That means that this public health care plan, whether it's Medicare or some modern version of Medicare, will compete against the private health care system for people to sign up. That competition is good. That's free market competition. We're good at that in America. And it brings down costs for everybody. Because it means that you have an option. You have an option of going with a public plan or a private plan. You're going to say, look, who gives me the best health care for the lowest cost? That will drive down costs. If we just have a public option, or we just have private health care, that it's sort of like a monopoly. And it doesn't actually drive down costs, it makes costs go up. So that's why I think my plan fits with American values, it fits with American consumers, and it will make sure that everybody in America gets good health care as a right.
You tweeted a critical response to Texas lawmakers that are considering legislation to make abortion punishable by death. So how would you as president push back against state legislatures that are proposing laws that make abortion inaccessible to people, to women?
I'm going to uphold what the Supreme Court has said, which is that these decisions are the responsibility of a woman. It's a woman's responsibility to make decisions about her own health care, and Congress shouldn't be going into the bedroom. Congress shouldn't be getting between, or state legislatures shouldn't be getting between a woman and her doctor. That's the bottom line for me. It's a woman's decision, period.
You want to make voting a national holiday.
I do.
And so that's obviously going to run against a lot of resistance. So how do you plan on carrying that out?
Well, look, I think it makes sense. We should want people to vote. And right now, a lot of people feel like they can't vote because if they have to get off work or they have to leave work early, they're going to lose their job or they're not going to get the pay that they need at the end of the week. So it should be our responsibility as leaders in our government to make sure that everybody has a vote in our democracy. It's not that hard. Have a holiday. I think it's a good opportunity to take Columbus Day and just change it into Election Day. I think we've sort of grown past Columbus Day these days. And make that an Election Day holiday. You also, by the way, have to give paid time off for people because, of course, some folks still have to work on federal holidays. The point is that no matter who you are or what job you have in America, if you're old enough to vote, you should have the right to vote, and we should make sure you can get to the polls.
So in reference to Stacey Abrams, you said that fair and free elections are hallmarks of democracy. So I'm curious as to what is your plan would be as president to push back and fight back against voter suppression?
Look, frankly, we need a new Voting Rights Act in America because if states like Georgia can't uphold this basic right of democracy, which is that everybody has a vote, and they clearly didn't in this last election, which I think robbed Stacey Abrams of the governorship, then the federal government has to go in and lay down the law just like we did in the 1960s and the 1970s. I would love to think that we had solved this problem with the original Voting Rights Act and that it wasn't an issue anymore, but this last election proved that it's an issue, and there's no better example than Georgia. There's no better example of a place where Republicans went out and committed election fraud. It's ironic that the Republican Party is out there saying, there's all this election fraud, and Trump is saying that there was election fraud that supported Hillary Clinton. No, the only election fraud going on is the election fraud coming from Republicans stealing votes from Americans, including an awful lot of black Americans in the South. And that's wrong. Stacey Abrams would be the governor right now if it wasn't the case. And if the state of Georgia or other states in the South can't do this job themselves, then it's the responsibility of the federal government to come in and do it for them.
As president, how would you enact the Green New Deal?
So I signed on to support the new Green Deal when it was in its infancy, when it was this framework to just say that we need to make climate change a priority, and I believe that to my core. I'm also, though, releasing my own components of what I think should make up the new Green Deal. And one of those first, which I talked about in Iowa a couple weeks ago, is a Green Corps, a service corps, another version of national service to give young people a chance to contribute to their country, to serve their country, to do it in exchange for education benefits like the GI Bill that I received that helped me to go to school after the Marine Corps, but to do it making our country more environmentally resilient, to make buildings more energy efficient. If you think about it, the original New Deal started under Franklin Roosevelt, put a lot of young Americans to work repairing our national parks. Well, I think we have a chance for a new conservation corps, but it's about green conservation. It's about making our buildings more efficient, making our country more resilient to climate change, and we can put young people to work doing that. It'll give young people opportunities across the board. It'll give them educational opportunities when they're done. And I think it'll bring Americans together in the same way that I found I came together with so many different Americans from diverse communities across the country by serving with them in the Marines. I think it'll make a stronger country if we have more national service opportunities for young Americans.
And speaking of diverse communities, how would you ensure that Black Americans benefit from this Green New Deal?
Well, you got to make sure that it's targeted to make sure that everybody in America, including Black communities, have good access to it. So this can't be some fancy internship thing. One of the things, I'll tell you, on Washington, D.C., we really work hard to recruit diverse interns. And it is hard. Why? Because the cost of living is so expensive in Washington, D.C., that it's often only privileged white people that get to be interns on Capitol Hill. So my office is starting a fellowship to actually pay intern salaries. We have our first two starting soon, so that a diverse group of Americans can do these internships on Capitol Hill, learn the political business, and also influence our votes. We need to make sure that happens with national service programs too, so that the same sort of diversity that I saw in the Marine Corps is also what we see in the Green Corps and other national service programs, City Year, AmeriCorps, other programs like that are making our country stronger and giving young people an opportunity to serve.
Do you believe sex work should be decriminalized?
I think that's an interesting discussion. I haven't actually seen both sides of the argument, but I don't have an answer for you right now. I'm going to be totally honest, because it's not an issue I've examined closely. But I guess the argument for it is that if you decriminalize it, which I understand some people are advocating for, then it's sort of like decriminalizing marijuana, and it just means it's out in the open, it's safe, and people can talk about it. This is, I guess, what they do in countries in Europe like France. But I'll have to get back to you on that one.
I appreciate your honesty. So you didn't bumble through it.
No, look, I'm going to be honest with you. And the amazing thing about this job is that you're sort of expected to be an expert on everything. But look, I don't know everything, and I'm going to tell you when I know things. I'm going to tell you when I don't. But one thing I promise is that if I'm elected president of the United States, I'm going to make sure that I listen to everybody and that I have a diverse administration full of a lot of different perspectives and ideas, so that we can get issues like this right. Because I can't be the expert on everything, but I'm going to make sure that we get to the heart of every issue and do have experts on the issues.
Thank you so much. This is a great conversation.
Thanks. Great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, same here.